Sophia, a woman trapped in an arranged marriage meant to save her family's future, never expected to find anything real. But as she navigates her fears, doubts, and the unexpected tenderness of her husband, Victor, she begins to question everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Will she continue to protect her heart, or will she take a leap of faith into the unknown? Their story is one of growth, vulnerability, and the courage to embrace change. Where are you tuning in from? Subscribe now to keep following Sophia's journey and discover what happens next. Sophia sat quietly on the porch, the soft hum of the night surrounding her, as the stars above blinked like distant memories. She stared at the sky, her thoughts a swirl of confusion and resignation. Her father, Samuel, had always been her anchor, and for the past few weeks, he'd been desperately trying to salvage their family's crumbling business. But tonight, the weight of the situation was heavier than ever. She had always trusted her father's judgment, but this felt different. The marriage he had arranged for her was supposed to be the solution to their financial crisis, a way to repay the years of sacrifices he had made. But what did that mean for her? What about her happiness? Sophia, her father's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle but with an underlying concern. I can't help but wonder if you're really sure about this. He approached her with 2 cups of coffee, his face creased with worry, and handed one to her. She forced a smile, taking the cup and savoring the warmth, but it did little to calm the storm inside her. "Daddy, I'm fine," she said, trying to sound convincing. "I understand why we're doing this. It's just business." Samuel sat down beside her, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped his coffee. His gaze was steady, but his eyes betrayed the depth of his concern. "I know how much you've sacrificed, but I still don't know if this is the right choice for you." He leaned in, his voice low. "You don't even know him, Sophia. This man you're supposed to marry, Victor. He's just my business partner. You've never met him." Sophia's heart sank. Her father had always been the protector, the one who took care of things, the one she had always trusted. But now, he was putting her in a position she hadn't anticipated. She had known about the arrangement for months, but this moment, the reality of it, was finally hitting her. "I know," she whispered, feeling the weight of the words. "But I trust you, Daddy. If you say he's a good man, then I'll believe it." Samuel's grip on his coffee tightened. "I just want to make sure you're not doing this because you feel you have to. Not because I'm asking you to. If you feel you're not ready for this, it's okay to say no." Sophia looked at him, her heart heavy with guilt. She couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him. But the truth was, she didn't know what else to do. "No, Daddy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm doing this for us. For you. I'll make it work." Her father's sigh was long, and there was a sadness in his eyes. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I just want you to be happy, Sophia. I know this is hard, and I know you're not expecting anything from him, but please, if things go wrong, don't hesitate to come back to me. I'll be here, always." Sophia swallowed hard, trying to push down the tears that threatened to rise. She hated seeing him this way, so vulnerable, so afraid for her. She had never seen him so uncertain before. "I promise, Daddy," she said, her voice strong despite the turmoil inside her. "I'll be fine. I'll be fine, and if anything goes wrong, I'll come back. I won't let you down." He held her hand a little tighter, his eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "I don't want you to feel like this is some kind of sacrifice. This is your life, Sophia. Don't lose yourself in all of this." Sophia nodded, the words ringing in her ears, but she didn't know how to respond. She didn't know what her life would look like after tomorrow. The idea of marrying a stranger, of giving herself to a man she had never met, felt so foreign to her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "Tomorrow," her father continued softly, "Victor will be here. I want you to know, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. This is your choice." Sophia's chest tightened, and she forced herself to smile. "I know, Daddy. I'll handle it." The night was still, but the air around them felt thick with unspoken words. They sat in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts, the stars above them offering no answers, only distant light. The next morning, Sophia woke early, her stomach in knots. Today was the day she would meet Victor Hayes, her father's business partner, her future husband. She couldn't help the rising tide of dread as she dressed, trying to focus on the task at hand. When she arrived at the airport, she had no idea what to expect. Her father had given her no details about the man, only that he was important. But when she saw him, when she saw Victor Hayes, her heart dropped. The man who stepped off the plane was much older than she had imagined, much older than she could ever have anticipated. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze in disbelief. Was this really the man she was supposed to marry? Sophia stood frozen at the airport terminal, her heart thundering in her chest. The man who had just stepped off the plane wasn't anything like she had imagined. He was much older than she had expected. His hair was graying at the temples, his face lined with wrinkles that spoke of a life well lived, but one that was perhaps a bit too long. He walked slowly, dragging a small suitcase behind him, his eyes scanning the crowd. And yet, when they met his gaze, something flickered there. Something that was sharp and calculating, like a man who had seen it all and wasn't surprised by anything anymore. Sophia's stomach churned. This was supposed to be the man she would marry, the man who would help save her father's business. But looking at him now, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He didn't look like the man who had been promised to her, at least not the man she had imagined. Her father had described him as an older, successful businessman, someone who could offer security for their family's future. But this was more than she had bargained for. The age gap felt suffocating, like a weight on her chest that she couldn't shake off. Victor Hayes, her future husband, wasn't the handsome, vibrant man she had hoped for. Instead, he looked like someone who belonged in a rocking chair, not a man she could ever picture by her side. Her breath hitched, and she took an instinctive step backward, her heart sinking. A deep sense of dread settled in her chest, and before she knew it, her legs were carrying her away. She didn't even think twice about it. She just needed to get out of there. She left her things behind without a second glance, turning on her heel and heading toward the exit. She couldn't face him, couldn't deal with this reality. The thought of marrying someone she couldn't even look at was unbearable. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, but she couldn't listen. Not now. She needed space to think, to breathe, to escape the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to drown her. Sophia found herself outside, standing in the cool breeze, her mind racing. She didn't want to go back to that life. She had felt trapped enough in her own home. This was not what she had imagined for her future. The idea of being tied to a man who felt more like a stranger than a partner seemed impossible. She could still hear her father's hopeful words, see the pride in his eyes as he had sent her off to meet Victor. But what if this was a mistake? What if she was making the biggest error of her life? Not wanting to be caught in the middle of her own thoughts, Sophia made a snap decision. She would leave. She would run. She couldn't go through with it. She couldn't go through with it. She couldn't marry a man she didn't even know, didn't even like. Her father might have had his reasons, but she had her own feelings to consider. She hailed a cab and gave the driver an address for a resort outside the city. As the car drove away, she watched the city disappear behind her, swallowed by the distance. She needed time to think, to clear her head. This whole thing felt wrong, but she didn't know what the right choice was anymore. When she arrived at the resort, She found herself sitting by the pool, trying to calm her racing heart. She stared into the still water, the reflection of the sky above her, a reminder of how everything seemed so peaceful from the outside. Yet inside, her world felt like it was crumbling. The air was thick with unease, but it also offered her a moment of respite from her decision. Sophia didn't want to think about Victor, about the weight of the future that had been thrust upon her. She just wanted to forget, even if it was for a moment. But just as she tried to relax, she felt a presence behind her, a shadow that loomed closer, the air around her seeming to shift. Without thinking, she turned and bumped into a man, stumbling back as he reached out to catch her. Her heart skipped a beat, her mind still foggy from the shock of everything that had happened. "Watch where you're going," the man said sharply, his tone more irritated than concerned. Sophia blinked, trying to regain her balance, but her head was still spinning. I'm sorry," she muttered, her voice shaky as she looked up at him. The man stared at her, his expression unreadable. He was tall, with dark hair and sharp features, dressed in a simple but well-fitted shirt and jeans. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it disappeared quickly. "Next time, keep your eyes open," he said, shaking his head as he started to walk past her. Sophia, still flustered, watched him go. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at her memories. She tried to brush it off, but something inside her felt uneasy. She didn't have time to dwell on it, though. Her life was falling apart, and this man, whoever he was just another complication she didn't need. With a deep sigh, Sophia turned back to the pool, her thoughts spiraling again. What was she going to do now? The next morning, Sophia awoke with a lingering headache, the remnants of her anxiety, fueled escape from the airport still haunting her. She had hoped a night at the resort would bring her some clarity, but instead she felt more lost than ever. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. Victor, the man she was supposed to marry, the one who could save her father's business, but also, it seemed, had the power to destroy her future. She rolled out of bed and stretched, trying to shake off the tightness in her chest. The fresh air outside called to her, and she decided to go for a walk along the beach. Maybe sometime by the ocean would help her think, help her find some peace. She threw on a simple sundress, the light fabric swishing around her legs as she stepped out onto the warm sand. The sun was beginning to climb higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the sea. Sophia tried to focus on the beauty of the moment, but it was impossible to ignore the heavy feeling in her stomach. What was she doing? Running away, hiding from the inevitable. She had known about the marriage for months. Her father had insisted it was the only way to save everything they had worked for. But now, standing on the edge of the world, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking straight into a trap. As she walked along the shoreline, she noticed the faint scent of salt water mixing with the sweet smell of tropical flowers. It was beautiful here, peaceful even. But the calmness of the place only highlighted her inner turmoil. She had made a decision to be here, to meet Victor, and yet everything inside her screamed to turn back. Her thoughts were interrupted when she stumbled, losing her balance and nearly falling into the water. Before she could catch herself, a strong hand shot out, steadying her. She looked up, startled, and found herself faced with the last person she had expected to see. It was him, the man she had just run from, Victor Hayes. His expression was unreadable as he stood in front of her, his hand still gently holding her arm. "You really should watch where you're going," he said, his voice as calm and collected as ever. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something that made Sophia's heart beat faster. It was the same thing she had seen when she first noticed him at the airport. A mixture of amusement and curiosity, as though he knew something she didn't. Sophia pulled away quickly, stepping back and raising her chin in defiance. Victor's lips curled into a half smile. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his tone teasing. "But I'm guessing you're not here to sightsee." Sophia felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. She had no answer to that. What was she doing here, really? Running away from the life her father had planned for her. She was still so unsure, so confused. She had no right to feel this way, not when her family depended on her. But the reality of marrying Victor, a man she didn't know, someone so much older, felt impossible to accept. "I don't want this," she blurted out, her voice shaking. "I don't want to be part of some business deal. This isn't what I signed up for." Victor raised an eyebrow, his expression thoughtful. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it? Why are you here? Why me?" Victor looked at her for a long moment, his gaze softening. "Because your father asked me to help," he said slowly. "But also because, well, because I'm trying to understand you, Sophia. I'm not just a businessman, and neither are you. I know this isn't easy for you, but it's not easy for me either. We're both being asked to play roles we didn't choose." Sophia felt a pang of surprise at his words. For a moment, she had expected him to dismiss her concerns, to treat her like a pawn in this whole scheme. But he hadn't. Instead, he was admitting that he understood her discomfort, that somehow, in the midst of all this chaos, they were both trapped in a situation neither of them had control over. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly, her voice wavering. "I never wanted to feel like I was trapped in someone else's plan. Not for my life, not for my happiness." Victor's eyes softened, and he took a step closer to her. "I know," he said, his voice gentle, "but maybe we can try to make it something more than that, not just a business deal. Maybe we can start with being honest with each other. No more pretending, no more running away. We've both been given a chance to do this differently." Sophia felt a knot in her chest loosen. There was something in his words that resonated with her, something that made her want to believe him. But was she ready to take that step, to let go of the fear, the uncertainty, and let herself trust this man who was, in many ways, just as much a stranger as she was to him? For the first time, she looked at Victor not as a business partner, not as the man she was supposed to marry, but as a person, someone who, like her, was caught in the web of circumstances neither of them had chosen. "Maybe," she said quietly, the word slipping from her lips before she even realized it. "Maybe we can try." Victor smiled, the weight of the tension between them easing just a little. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be as impossible as she had feared. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for both of them, if they were willing to take the leap. The days that followed were a strange mix of tension and reluctant companionship. Sophia had agreed, albeit with hesitation, to give her arranged marriage a chance, but the road ahead felt treacherous, like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Victor seemed determined to prove that he wasn't just a businessman, that there was more to him than the role he had been cast into by their families. And somehow, against her better judgment, Sophia found herself watching him more closely, observing the little things, the way his gaze softened when he spoke of his past, the rare moments when his tough exterior cracked, showing glimpses of vulnerability. But despite the small moments of connection, she couldn't escape the feeling that everything was just too complicated. She wasn't sure if she was getting closer to him or if she was just growing more confused. What was she really doing here? What was she really feeling? One evening, after a long day spent with Victor, Sophia found herself back at the resort, standing at the edge of the beach, staring at the vast ocean stretching endlessly before her. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. She had come here to escape, to find some clarity, but all she had found was more questions. Victor had been right about one thing. This wasn't easy for either of them. He was just as trapped in this situation as she was. But did that mean they could find something real together? Or was it all just a fleeting illusion, a way to fill a void created by their family's decisions? Tenny, for your thoughts. Victor's voice broke through her reverie, and she turned to find him standing a few feet away, looking at her with that same contemplative expression he often wore when he wasn't hiding behind his usual confident demeanor. Sophia gave him a small, tired smile. "Not sure you'd be interested in the price," she replied dryly, but the words lacked the bite they usually had. There was something about him tonight, something different that made her hesitate before pushing him away. Victor stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "Try me," he said softly, the challenge in his tone not the usual teasing one but something more earnest. "What's going on in that head of yours, Sophia? You've been distant lately, like you're running from something." She turned back to the ocean, not trusting herself to meet his eyes. "I don't know what I'm running from," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm running at all, but this, us, feels like a mistake." Victor was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and sincere. "You think I want this to be a mistake? I don't. And I'm not just talking about the business part. I know that's why we're here, but I want to make this work. Not just for the company. For us. For you and me." Sophia glanced at him, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "You really think we can make this work? After everything? After I ran from you at the airport? After I ran from you at the airport? After all this time?" Victor nodded, his expression unwavering. "Why not? We don't get to choose the circumstances, but we get to choose how we deal with them. And I'm choosing to make this work, Sophia. I'm choosing to make you see that this, we could have, might be worth fighting for." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard, and for the first time, she felt a small shift in her own heart. Could it be true? Could there be something real here? Something beyond the business deal? Beyond the obligation to their families? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice faltering. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust anyone again, let alone someone I don't even know." Victor stepped closer, his presence warm and steady. "You don't have to be ready yet. But trust me, I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility. Let's take this one step at a time." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at him. It was as if, in that moment, she saw a different side of him. A side that wasn't just the man she had to marry for her family's sake. A man who, despite his past, despite everything, was trying to build something genuine with her. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, the vulnerability in her words surprising her. "But I'm willing to try. I think I owe that much to both of us." Victor smiled, his eyes softening. "That's all I'm asking for, Sophia. A chance." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time since they had met, Sophia felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't all hopeless. Maybe it wasn't all hopeless. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. But as she stood there, with the waves crashing against the shore and the soft breeze tugging at her hair, Sophia knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more doubts, more fears, more challenges, but maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in this as she had believed. Maybe there was a chance for something real after all. The days passed in a blur, each one feeling heavier than the last. Sophia found herself in a constant battle between what she knew she should do for her family and what her heart was beginning to whisper to her. Her mind was clouded with doubt, but the more time she spent with Victor, the more she saw a side of him she hadn't expected. He was not just a businessman, not just the man she was bound to by family obligation. He was someone who had his own battles, his own demons, and yet, despite everything, he was trying to make this work for them both. It was an afternoon, nearly a week after their conversation by the beach, when things finally reached a tipping point. Sophia had been avoiding him as much as possible. She had convinced herself that staying distant, staying cold, was the only way to protect herself. But deep down, she knew it was because she was scared. Scared of what would happen if she let herself care too much, too quickly. Scared of how vulnerable she'd become if she allowed herself to trust him. She sat by the window in her room, looking out at the sunset. The sky was painted with warm shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of it didn't lift the heaviness in her heart. She could feel him in the background, like a shadow that always seemed to be present, even when he wasn't physically near. She had spent the past few days convincing herself that she didn't need him, that this marriage, this arrangement, was just something she had to endure for the sake of her family. But the truth was, the more she saw of him, the more she realized how impossible it would be to just pretend this was a simple transaction. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She didn't need to guess who it was. She had learned his patterns by now, and despite everything, despite her attempts to push him away, he always seemed to find her. He wasn't going to let her run. Not anymore. With a sigh, she stood and opened the door, meeting Victor's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't just determination, but something deeper, something more personal. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low but laced with a quiet intensity that caught her off guard. Sophia hesitated for a moment, her hand still resting on the doorknob. "I don't know if there's much to talk about anymore," she replied, her tone softer than she intended. Victor stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. "There's always something to talk about, Sophia," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "You can't keep running from this, from us." Sophia's heart clenched, but she refused to show any vulnerability. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to maintain some sense of control. "I'm not running. I'm just not ready. I don't know what you expect from me, Victor, but I'm not ready to give you my heart. Not when everything's been planned out for me like this." Victor's face softened, and he stepped closer, though he didn't touch her. "I don't expect your heart, Sophia," he said quietly. "I'm not asking for it right now. I'm asking for a chance, a real chance. A real chance, a chance to see if we can make this work, not just for ourselves." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to resist. She wanted to tell him that it was too complicated, too painful, and that she couldn't afford to get involved with him, not when she didn't even know what her future held. But something in his gaze, something in the way he looked at her as if she was more than just a business arrangement, broke through her defenses. "You really think we can make this work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor nodded, his expression earnest. "I do. And I don't think it's as complicated as you're making it out to be. Yes, our families have tied us together, but we're the ones who have to decide how this goes. You don't have to give up everything to make this work, but I need you to give me a chance to show you that it's worth it." Sophia swallowed, the weight of his words sinking in. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the man she was supposed to marry out of duty. She was seeing him as a man who genuinely wanted to build something with her, Something that wasn't just about business or obligation. It was about trust, about taking a step into the unknown together. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what I'm doing, Victor. I don't know if I can trust you, or if I can trust myself in this situation." Victor reached out, placing a hand gently on her arm. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just take it one day at a time. We'll take it slow. We'll build this together. No pressure, no expectations, just—" Sophia looked down at his hand on her arm, the warmth of his touch sending a jolt through her. She had been so focused on the fear, on the uncertainty of it all, that she hadn't allowed herself to see the possibility in this. Maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for here. She met his eyes again, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. "One day at a time," she repeated softly, as if testing the words, and in that moment she realized that she wasn't as alone in this as she wasn't as alone in this as she had thought. Maybe it wasn't just about surviving the marriage. Maybe it was about finding something more, a future that neither of them had planned, but one they could choose together. The air in the resort seemed to thicken with anticipation. As Sophia woke the next morning, her mind still clouded with the lingering uncertainty of the day before. She had agreed, however reluctantly, to give Victor a chance. But as she gazed at her reflection in the mirror, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making a mistake. The thought of walking into a life with someone she didn't truly know felt like a heavy burden. She had barely allowed herself to breathe the days leading up to this decision. Sophia dressed in a simple outfit, trying to look composed, but she could still feel the tension in her shoulders. Her thoughts were consumed by what Victor had said the day before. "We'll take it one day at a time." Could she really trust that? Was she ready to embark on this unpredictable journey with him? Or was she merely playing along because it was expected of her? The breakfast table was quiet that morning. Samuel, her father, was distracted, buried in papers, and Sophia could tell he was growing more anxious as each day passed. She knew he was hoping the marriage would be a lifeline for the business, but she could also see the worry in his eyes. This wasn't just about saving their company. It was about saving him, too. She hated that this burden had fallen onto her shoulders, and yet, in a strange way, she understood why it had to be her. After breakfast, Sophia found herself walking around the resort, needing to clear her head before she faced Victor again. She didn't know what to expect from their next interaction. Would they continue to dance around each other, pretending that this was all just fine? Or would the tension between them crack wide open? As she walked, her thoughts were interrupted when she felt a presence beside her. Without looking, she knew who it was. Victor's shadow seemed to follow her everywhere. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice light but carrying an edge that made her pause. Sophia stopped and turned to him. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "I just need some space, Victor. I need time to think. This is a lot." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze softening. "I understand," he said, "but I can't help but feel like you're keeping something from me. I know we're taking it slow, but there's more to this than just a marriage of convenience. Isn't there?" Sophia exhaled sharply. There it was again, the pressure. She had thought that agreeing to give him a chance would ease the tension, but it was only growing heavier. How much longer could she keep pretending that everything would just fall into place? She had been fooling herself, hadn't she? "I don't know what you want from me, Victor," she said, her words filled with frustration. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be part of some business arrangement. I didn't ask to be thrown into a situation where I'm supposed to be married to someone I barely know." Victor's face softened with understanding. "I don't want you to feel like this is something you're forced into. But it's not just business for me either, Sophia. It's not easy for me either, okay? We both have our reasons. but we also have a choice now. We can choose to make this work. Sophia looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she had agreed to this strange arrangement. She saw the genuine sincerity in his eyes. The way his posture wasn't that of a man simply fulfilling a duty, but a man who was trying, really trying, to make her believe that this could be something real. And for the first time in days, she felt her guard drop, even if just a little. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," she confessed, her voice barely audible. Victor nodded, accepting her honesty without question. "You don't have to trust me fully right now. I'm asking for time. Time for us to get to know each other beyond what's been forced on us. I can't promise everything will be easy, but I can promise that I'll try." Sophia looked at him, uncertainty swirling in her chest. There was no denying the chemistry between them, no denying the moments of connection that had snuck up on her. But that didn't make it any easier to face the reality of what they were supposed to be. A contract, a duty, a sacrifice for both of their families. "I'm scared," she whispered, almost to herself. "Scared of giving up what little control I have left. Scared of being vulnerable." Victor's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his voice steady but kind. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Sophia. I'm just asking you to let go of some of the fear. We'll take this one day at a time, like we agreed. And when you're ready, you can trust me." Sophia felt a pang in her chest, the weight of the emotions she had been holding back for so long finally breaking through. She wanted to trust him, but she was scared. Scared of what would happen if she did, and what it would mean if she didn't. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she was ready to make a decision. But in that moment, with Victor standing before her, offering her something that wasn't just an obligation, she knew that whatever happened next, she wasn't going to face it alone. He was offering her a chance to build something real, not just out of necessity, but out of possibility. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice a little shaky. Victor smiled, a look of relief washing over him. "That's all I'm asking for." And for the first time, Sophia felt a glimmer of hope, a faint light shining through the dark clouds that had hovered over her heart. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. Sophia woke to a feeling of restlessness, the same unease she had been carrying for days now, pressing down on her chest. She had agreed to give Victor a chance, but every time she thought about the future, the weight of her decision seemed to grow heavier. She had barely had time to digest her own emotions, let alone confront the possibility of a life with a man she barely knew. She had told herself that they would take things slowly, that they would figure it out. But as she walked out onto the balcony that morning, her thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Was she truly ready for this? The morning sun streamed through the hotel room window, casting long shadows across the floor, and the scent of the ocean mingled with the cool breeze. She stepped outside, leaning against the railing, letting the calmness of the sea wash over her. She needed to think, to breathe. She couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything, she was missing something important. Something about herself, about what she really wanted, about the life she was being asked to accept. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "This is for the family, Sophia. You know what's at stake. But what about her? What about her? What about her dreams? Her own happiness?" It wasn't that she didn't love her family, but she felt like a pawn in a game that had been set up long before she even understood the rules. Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, seeing that it was a message from Victor. "Meet me at the beach. I know you're feeling lost, but we need to talk. This isn't over." She didn't know why, but something about the message unsettled her. He had always been persistent, always seemed to find her no matter where she went. For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to face him again, to deal with the storm of emotions he brought with him. But then, against her better judgment, she found herself walking toward the beach, unsure of what would happen next, but unable to resist the pull. When she arrived, she found Victor, standing by the water, his back to her, looking out at the horizon. His posture was tense, and she could feel the weight of his silence. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage, before walking up to him. He turned as she approached, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "You came," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I didn't have much of a choice," she replied, her words more biting than she intended. But despite herself, there was a flicker of something else in her gaze. Something more vulnerable, a little less guarded. Victor didn't respond to her sarcasm. Instead, he took a step closer, his expression serious. "I know you're scared," he said. "Hell, I'm scared too. But running away from this, from us, isn't going to solve anything." Sophia's heart tightened. "I never wanted this, Victor. I didn't choose this. I don't even know who you are beyond what I've been told, and I'm terrified that I'm just another piece in your plan. And I'm terrified that I'm just another piece in your plan, in this game that neither of us asked to play." Victor's face softened, and he stepped even closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're not just another piece, Sophia, and I'm not just a man in a suit trying to seal a deal. I'm someone who's trying to get to know you, someone who's trying to make this work, not because I have to, but because I have to, but because I want to. I want to make this more than what we're both afraid of. I want to make it real." Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she felt the storm inside her calm, if only slightly. She looked away, her gaze shifting to the waves crashing against the shore. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that maybe, just maybe, there was something genuine in what he was saying. But the fear that had been gnawing at her for so long held her back. "I don't know how to trust you," she said quietly, her voice wavering. "I don't know how to trust anyone right now." Victor was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on her. "I get it," he said finally, his voice low. "I know you're scared, but you don't have to have it all figured out today. You don't have to make any promises, just don't run away from this. Don't run away from this. Don't run away from me. Give us a chance." Sophia's heart ached at his words. She had spent so long running, so long trying to protect herself from feeling anything that might hurt. But now, standing here with Victor, she realized that maybe it wasn't about protecting herself anymore. Maybe it was about allowing herself to feel, to trust, and to open her heart to something she hadn't expected. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the man she was supposed to marry out of obligation. She saw someone who, despite his flaws and his past, was trying to build something real with her. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. "I won't run," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "But I can't promise anything." Victor smiled, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "That's all I'm asking for," he said, "one step at a time." And for the first time in days, Sophia felt a flicker of hope in her chest. It wasn't a guarantee, not yet, but it was a chance. And maybe that was enough for now. Sophia couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly calm. It seemed like the whirlwind of the past few days had not only uprooted her sense of security, but also had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and even her future. She had reluctantly agreed to give Victor a chance, but each passing day only added more weight to the growing uncertainty that loomed over her. The moments when they laughed together, or shared a quiet conversation, didn't erase the feeling that they were just playing roles in a story they hadn't written themselves. They had both been thrust into this marriage, and now they were stuck navigating an ocean of expectations that neither of them had chosen. It was the third day of their stay at the resort, and the tension between them was palpable. The distance Sophia had maintained despite her growing attraction to him only made things harder. Victor's persistence had worn down some of her defenses, but she couldn't bring herself to fully trust him. What if she let her guard down only to be disappointed again? She didn't know if she could bear that kind of pain. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting golden hues over the horizon, Sophia found herself walking along the beach once more, her thoughts a tangled mess. She needed to clear her head, but every step seemed to bring her closer to something she wasn't ready to confront. Her footsteps slowed as she saw Victor standing by the water, his figure outlined against the orange and pink sky. He looked so different from the businessman she had first imagined, a man of power, of control. Instead, there was something vulnerable about him that moment, something she hadn't seen before. He didn't notice her right away, and Sophia stood there for a moment, watching him. His shoulders were slightly slumped, and his gaze was distant, as if he was lost in his own thoughts. For a brief second, she wondered what he was really feeling. Was he as confused as she was? Was he questioning whether he was doing the right thing? Taking a deep breath, she walked toward him. When he finally turned, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, and then his face softened. "Sophia," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and something else. Relief, maybe. "I didn't expect to see you out here." She offered him a small smile, her nerves evident despite her attempt to appear calm. "I needed some air," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She paused, trying to find the right words. "There's a lot going on in my head, Victor. I don't know how to make sense of any of it." Victor studied her, his expression serious but understanding. "I get it," he said softly. "It's not easy. I know we're both caught in a situation neither of us asked for, and I don't want you to feel like you're obligated to go along with it. But I can't pretend that this isn't important to me." Sophia's heart fluttered at the sincerity in his voice. She had always known he was more than just a businessman. There was something deeper there, something raw. But what did that mean for her? What did it mean for them? "I never wanted this," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the waves crashing against the shore. "I never wanted to be forced into a marriage for someone else's gain. I don't even know what this is supposed to be. It's like I've been pushed into this role, this life that doesn't even feel like mine anymore." Victor took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "I understand. But it doesn't have to stay like that, Sophia. This doesn't have to be a marriage of obligation. I want you to see that. I'm not asking you to just accept it. I'm asking for a chance to prove that there's more here than just what we were both told." Sophia felt her chest tighten at his words. She had been trying so hard to keep her emotions in check, trying to hold on to the control she thought she needed. But the more she listened to him, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, this could be different. Maybe there was something worth pursuing here, something worth risking her heart for. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust myself." Victor's expression softened, and for the first time since they had met, he seemed to relax. He reached out, his hand gently brushing against her arm, a subtle but meaningful gesture that sent a shiver through her. "You don't have to trust me completely right now," he said quietly. "But I'm asking you to give me a chance. We don't have to have all the answers today. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Just take a step forward with me. No pressure, just..." The way he said it felt different this time. It wasn't a business arrangement. It wasn't a deal made by their families. It was something more. Something real. Sophia felt a flicker of hope, but also a deep sense of fear. Could she really let go of the walls she had built around herself? Could she truly open her heart to someone she barely knew? She didn't have the answers, but for the first time, she was willing to try. With a hesitant but genuine smile, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. Victor's face lit up with a smile, and in that moment, the distance between them seemed to shrink. "That's all I'm asking for," he said. Sophia took a deep breath, the weight on her shoulders lifting just a little. There was still so much to figure out, so much she didn't understand, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was carrying it all alone. With Victor by her side, maybe they could figure it out together. The sun had barely risen when Sophia stood by the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of the ocean. It was early, and the resort was still quiet, but her mind was anything but peaceful. The past few days had been a whirlwind of emotions, each one pulling her in different directions. She had agreed to give Victor a chance, but the more time she spent with him, the more complicated everything seemed to get. Part of her wanted to hold on to the hope that they could make this work, that maybe the connection between them wasn't just born of obligation. But the other part of her, the part that had always been cautious, always been the one to guard her heart, was terrified that she was letting herself get too close, too vulnerable. She couldn't afford to lose herself in this. She couldn't afford to get hurt. She turned away from the window with a sigh, her eyes landing on the empty space around her. It had been a while since she had felt truly at peace, and the more she thought about her situation, the more she realized she didn't know how to move forward. She was torn between her father's expectations, the demands of their families, and her own desires. This marriage was supposed to be a solution to their financial troubles. But could it ever be more than that? Could she really see herself building a future with Victor, the man who was practically a stranger to her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She didn't need to guess who it was. Victor. He had been persistent, always showing up when she least expected it. But today, she didn't feel ready to face him. Not like this. Not when everything inside her was still so confused. When she opened the door, she was greeted by his familiar, calm presence. He stood there, as usual, composed with that quiet confidence that had both drawn her in and made her want to run away at the same time. "I know you're probably not ready to talk," he said, his voice warm but gentle. "But I need to tell you something." Sophia didn't know why, but there was something in his tone that made her want to listen. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter, her heart beating faster as she braced herself for whatever it was he had to say. Victor closed the door behind him and turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I know you've been struggling with this whole situation," he began, his eyes softening. "I know it's been hard for you to trust me, and I get it. You're scared. I've seen it in your eyes every time we talk about the future. But I need you to understand something." Sophia crossed her arms, trying to maintain her composure, but her heart was racing. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor took a deep breath, stepping closer to her, his presence overwhelming in the best way. "I'm not asking you to just blindly trust me," he said softly, "but I'm asking you to trust that I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to play games, Sophia. I'm here because I want to be with you, not because I have to. I want us to figure this out together, and I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work, no matter how hard it gets." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. There was something about the way he said it, something genuine, something real, that made her heart ache. She had been so focused on protecting herself, on guarding her emotions, that she hadn't allowed herself to see what was right in front of her. Victor wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't just the man she was supposed to marry for the sake of their families. He was someone who truly cared about her, who wanted to build something meaningful with her, even if it meant taking things slow. "I'm scared too," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can trust you or if I can trust myself in this situation. It's just, everything feels so out of my control." Victor's gaze softened, and he gently reached out, placing his hand on hers. The touch was warm, steady, and comforting in a way she hadn't expected. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now," he said, his voice low and soothing. "But I'm here, Sophia. I'm not going anywhere. And I want you to know that I'm willing to wait for you to trust me. We'll take it one step at a time, together." Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. She had spent so long trying to control every aspect of her life, trying to keep her emotions in check. But in this moment, she realized that maybe it was okay to let go. Maybe it was okay to trust someone again, to open her heart to the possibility of love. When she opened her eyes, she met Victor's gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "Okay," she said softly, her voice steadier now. "One step at a time." Victor's face lit up with a smile, and in that moment, everything felt a little less uncertain. They still had a long road ahead of them. So many things left unsaid, so many fears left to face, so many fears left to face. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia felt like maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. They could find their way through this together. And that, she realized, was enough for now. The days after their conversation on the beach felt different for Sophia. The weight of the tension that had been building between her and Victor seemed to dissipate, replaced by something she wasn't sure how to name. It was a quiet kind of understanding, an unspoken agreement to take things slowly, to move forward one step at a time. There was still fear inside her, a nagging doubt that she wasn't fully prepared to trust him, to let herself be vulnerable, but something in the way Victor had looked at her, genuine, steady, patient, made her think that maybe she wasn't alone in this. But even with this newfound understanding between them, the reality of her situation hadn't changed. Her father, Samuel, was still counting on this marriage to secure the future of the family business. And the weight of that responsibility pressed down on Sophia's shoulders more heavily with each passing day. She had agreed to give Victor a chance, but could she really keep balancing the delicate line between what her family needed and what her family needed and what her heart wanted? It was the evening of the company's annual gala when things took an unexpected turn. The event, a grand affair held at a hotel downtown, was the perfect opportunity for the families to come together and show off their unity, especially to potential investors who still held the fate of the business in their hands. Victor had asked Sophia to accompany him, and despite her reservations, she had agreed. She needed to stand by her family, needed to keep up the illusion that everything was fine, even though she wasn't sure what role she was really playing anymore. Sophia had chosen a simple yet elegant dress for the evening, a deep emerald green that complemented her features without drawing too much attention. She wasn't looking for a spotlight, just a quiet presence, a graceful addition to the evening's proceedings. But when she stepped into the ballroom, her eyes immediately found Victor across the room. He was talking with some of the investors, his demeanor calm and commanding as he made introductions and exchanged pleasantries. It was a side of him she had seen before, the businessman, the man who knew how to command attention to get things done. But tonight, he wasn't just Victor Hayes, the powerful partner in her father's business. He was her husband, the man she had reluctantly married for all the wrong reasons. And yet, she found herself thinking, what if this could be something more? As the night wore on, Sophia found herself surrounded by a mix of familiar faces and strangers, many of them congratulating her on her marriage to Victor, offering polite smiles and courteous words. But the longer she stayed in the room, the more she felt a sense of disconnect. She wasn't a part of this world. She wasn't a part of this facade, this carefully curated image of success and wealth that everyone else seemed so eager to uphold. And for the first time, the mask she had been wearing for so long began to feel suffocating. Victor finally made his way over to her, his hand resting lightly on her back as he leaned in, his voice low, almost as if he could sense the turmoil swirling inside her. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face with concern. Sophia nodded, forcing a smile, but she could tell he wasn't convinced. "Yeah, just a little overwhelmed." Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I get it," he said softly. "This isn't easy. I know that. But we're doing this together, okay? I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this." Her heart skipped at his words, and for the first time that evening, she let herself breathe, really breathe, without pretending that everything was fine. The thought of facing this life with him, of doing it together, maybe it wasn't so impossible after all. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about obligation anymore. Maybe it could be about something more. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time that evening, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to feel alone either." Victor smiled, his expression warm. And for a moment, the weight of the room, the expectations, the responsibilities, everything, faded into the background. It was just the two of them. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't just about business. There was something deeper between them, something real, and even though it was still fragile, she felt a flicker of hope. "I know," he said gently, "and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since she had agreed to this marriage, Sophia felt a sense of peace. She had come into this with so many doubts, so many fears about the future, but standing here, with Victor's hand on her back and his words grounding her, she realized that maybe it was okay to let go of some of that fear. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something real together. As the evening continued, Sophia's thoughts turned less toward what she had been forced into, and more toward what they could become. Together. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even know what the future would look like. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just walking this path for her family. She was walking it for herself, too. And that, she realized, was a start. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, almost reluctant descent into a future Sophia had never expected. The strain of living up to her family's expectations was still there, lingering in the background. But something in her had shifted. She no longer saw herself as just a pawn in a game she didn't choose. She saw herself as someone who could make decisions for her future, even if they weren't all clear yet. Victor had proven to her, time and again, that he was not the man she had first imagined him to be. He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't just a businessman she had married for the sake of family obligation. He was someone who had slowly, carefully shown her the possibility of something real. Still, that fear gnawed at her, the uncertainty about what she was truly stepping into. She couldn't ignore it. She could no longer pretend that everything would magically fall into place, that somehow the pieces of her life would all align without effort. But every day, she found herself inching closer to something she hadn't anticipated: trust. She had begun to trust him in small, subtle ways. The way he looked out for her at the gala. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, without interrupting or trying to fix things. And when he took her hand during their quiet moments together, she no longer pulled away. It was the night before the official signing of the marriage contract that Victor caught her off guard. They were sitting in a small cafe by the sea, the sound of the waves mingling with the low hum of conversation around them. It had been a long day of meetings, of finalizing the last of the details. Sophia had been lost in her thoughts, unsure of what to expect from the ceremony the next day. She hadn't even considered how she was supposed to feel. It wasn't that she wasn't grateful to Victor for making her feel more comfortable. She just didn't know what to do with the feelings that had started to surface. Victor broke the silence, his voice quiet yet steady, as if he had been waiting for the right moment. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "But I need you to know that I'm not here because of a contract. Sophia, I'm here because I want this marriage. I want us to build something together, no matter what that looks like." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she had expected him to say, but it certainly wasn't that. His words, his openness, made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't prepared for. She had come into this marriage with so much doubt, so much fear about whether it was the right thing, and yet here he was, expressing a sincerity that melted some of her guarded defenses. "I don't know how to be what you want," she confessed softly, her eyes finding his. "I don't know how to give you everything you deserve." Victor's smile was gentle, understanding. "I'm not asking for perfection, Sophia. I'm not asking for everything. I'm asking for your trust, for your willingness to walk this path with me, one step at a time. And I'm willing to be patient. I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes." Sophia felt the weight of his words sink in. There was no pressure, no expectations. He wasn't demanding her heart. He wasn't trying to force her into a mold. He was simply offering her the space to be herself, to take her time. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope, a small light that broke through the fog of her fears. The next day, the ceremony was a quiet affair, much smaller than expected, but still full of significance. Sophia had never imagined that this moment would come with so many emotions swirling within her. Standing at the altar, her hand in Victor's, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This wasn't just about the contract anymore. It wasn't just about her family's business. It was about them, about taking a step into the unknown, together. Victor's eyes met hers. And for the first time since this whole arrangement began, Sophia realized that there was no script to follow. There was no perfect formula for love, no perfect way to build a marriage. It wasn't something that could be forced. It was something that had to be nurtured step by step. They had both chosen this path. Chosen each other, not because it was easy, but because they believed in the possibility of something more. As they exchanged vows, Sophia could feel her heart begin to open in a way it hadn't before. She had always thought that love was something that could be controlled, something that could be planned. But standing here beside Victor, she realized that love wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And this was just the beginning. With the ceremony over and their vows sealed, Victor smiled at her, his expression one of quiet pride. "We made it," he said, his voice low but full of meaning. "And now we get to build this. Together." Sophia's heart swelled with emotion, the weight of the past weeks lifting off her shoulders. She still didn't have all the answers. There were still challenges ahead, obstacles they would face. But as she looked at Victor, she realized that maybe this marriage, this life they were beginning, wasn't just a solution to a family crisis. It was a chance for them both to write their own story. And that, she realized, was more than enough. It had been a few months since the wedding, and while Sophia had tried to convince herself that things were going as planned, she knew deep down that nothing was as simple as it seemed. She and Victor had settled into a rhythm, one that was less about the business arrangement and more about the quiet, everyday moments they shared. But there was always something in the back of her mind, something she couldn't ignore. She had started to care for him, really care, but there were still pieces of her past, of her fears, that she couldn't fully shake off. Victor had been patient with her, more patient than she ever thought possible. He had never pushed her for more than she was willing to give, but sometimes Sophia couldn't help but wonder if he was just waiting for her to come to terms with everything. and she knew that he deserved more. He deserved her heart, fully and completely. But was she ready to give it to him? Could she trust herself to not fall into the same patterns she had before? The fear of losing herself, of losing control, haunted her every time she let herself get too close. It was on one of those nights, when everything felt overwhelming, that Victor surprised her. They were sitting on the couch in their living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting flickering shadows on the walls. The evening had been quiet. Too quiet, in fact. It was the kind of silence that filled the space between them, a comfortable one, but also a reminder of the unspoken things they hadn't yet said. Victor had been watching her, his eyes gentle but searching. She could feel his gaze on her, but she avoided his eyes, not ready for whatever he might say. She had built walls around her heart, and they weren't easy to take down, no matter how much she wanted to let go. "You know, you don't have to carry this burden alone, Sophia," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence like a calm breeze. She stiffened slightly, but he continued, his words steady. "I've always known that we didn't start this marriage with the same foundation as most people. But what I need from you, what I want, is for you to stop holding yourself back. I want you to trust me. Trust that I'm not just your husband for the business. Trust that I'm near because I care for you, because I want to build something with you." Sophia swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She'd been waiting for this moment, the one where he would ask her to open up, to give him something more. But she wasn't ready. Or was she? "I don't know how to let go," she whispered, her voice small. "I don't know how to trust someone without expecting them to hurt me." Victor's expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't rush in with promises or reassurances. Instead, he simply took her hand, his touch warm and steady, grounding her. "I'm not asking you to let go of everything at once. Just take a small step. Trust that I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to be with you, and I want to build a life with you. And I want to build a life with you, no matter how messy or complicated that might be." Sophia felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it, and she quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by her sudden vulnerability. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, trying to protect herself from the possibility of pain. But in that moment, with Victor's hand in hers, she realized that maybe it wasn't about protection anymore. Maybe it was about being open, about letting someone in. "I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve," she said, her voice trembling with fear and uncertainty. "But I want to try. I really do." Victor smiled, his eyes tender. "That's all I'm asking for, Sophia." The words hung in the air between them, soft and full of promise. For the first time, Sophia didn't feel the weight of her doubts pressing down on her. She felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted just by saying those words out loud. She didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to take the first step. She was ready to trust him. "I'm scared," she admitted, the fear still there, but tempered by something new, something hopeful. "But I think I can do this, with you." Victor squeezed her hand, and they sat there in the quiet, the fire crackling softly in the background. There was no grand declaration, no moment of perfect clarity, but in that moment, Sophia realized that this wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about choosing to be vulnerable, choosing to trust, and choosing to let go of the fear that had kept her from living fully. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Something worth fighting for. As the story of Sophia and Victor unfolds, we witness the complexities of love, trust, and personal growth. One of the most important lessons we can take from their journey is that love is not just about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It's about taking small, deliberate steps toward each other, even when fear and doubt are present. Trust is built over time, not in a single moment, and vulnerability is the key to truly connecting with someone. Sophia's journey teaches us that it's okay to be scared, but it's also okay to take risks when we believe in the possibility of something real. Relationships are not always easy, and sometimes we have to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves, but that doesn't mean we should shy away from them. Growth happens when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to learn from our mistakes, and to open our hearts to new possibilities. In life, just like in love, it's not about having everything figured out right away. It's about being open to the journey, trusting the process, and allowing ourselves to grow, even when it feels uncertain. No matter where we start, the most important thing is to take that first step forward, knowing that the path ahead might be challenging, but also worth it. So, where are you on your own journey? What have you learned about trust and love in your life? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories and insights. Share with us where you're tuning in from, and let's continue the conversation